I feel that I haven't given the French a fair shake. When your only exports in the gaming world happen to be a disgraced homophobic game designer who thinks he's an ally in current day Ubisoft, yeah, that's enough for anyone to write off that region of the world. But what if I told you that Ubisoft did have a soul, as the game we're looking at today was made when the company had one? Let's talk about Rayman 3, Hoodlum Havoc. Speaking of characters long forgotten, I'm going to assume most of you will think of either the Rabbids or the modern 2D side-scrolling games when I say his name. I know I mostly do because when I was growing up, Rayman was mostly a punchline. Dude lost his franchise to the precursor of the Minions. The only way he shook off such stigma was by having two relatively decent pseudo-throwbacks. I don't know personally, as a demo on the 3DS was all the exposure I had to today's Rayman, but people say they're good. Great even, yet this is a story connected to younger me who found himself in precarious situations all the time. Amidst the discovery of Yasugna no Sora, the Noah of the past had a strange fixation on GameCube games he missed out on. Regularly with his allowance, he traversed the seas of eBay, reclaiming video long forgotten. A few bounties he hauled up included Yu-Gi-Oh! The Falsebound Kingdom, Digimon World 2, and this game. Don't question why he had a fixation on licensed games. The two preceding are something else. The one we will concern ourselves with in this section is not Ubisoft, though they do have a role to play. For us to begin, we must scope out Michel Ancel. Before the personal investigation into him for his toxic behavior within Ubisoft that led to him leaving the company, cementing his status in the industry of Beyond Good and Evil, the gig that landed him a collaboration with Peter Jackson on the King Kong game, or even coming up with the character of Rayman alongside Frederic Hode, Michel's journey starts at his childhood. Taken from an interview with NowGamer, Ancel explains that I discovered video games when I was 6 or 7. It was kind of magical to me, you know? Being able to interact with your TV was great. Then at our schools in France we had computers, so we were trained to program and I quickly began to become fascinated with them. A young Ancel's interactions with the Game & Watch and ColecoVision pushed him into the career of games development, though with the many computers surrounding him, as around this time the family computer boom was raging all throughout Europe, Ancel chose to develop for the PC. In his own words, it was before all these things, but very quickly on the personal computers you were able to program your own graphics and your own games, and I moved over to this idea of working on computers, so I started using computers like the Amiga and the Atari ST. Lacking money, however, Ancel had to work with an outdated Atari 800 XL to truly learn the ropes of programming, as he couldn't afford the hip new Commodore 64, his fortune turning only later when he acquired an Atari ST. Due to his hard knock life, he had to settle on both personal experience with his own ventures into a burgeoning industry as well as community sharing, his friends adopting Michel's enthusiasm when it came to discoveries. But what separated him from his peers was his ambition, what would drive Ancel into drafting the idea for Mechanic Warriors, self-described as a mix between an arcade game and a real-time strategy game and an RTS game where you had to battle between different groups of robots, where defeating other robots allowed you to create more by scavenging for parts. Ancel's project would see the light of day as Zono's Metal Fatigue.
Wait, okay, so does this sound remarkably familiar? This is PlanetSide. The entire setup, the factions, it is strikingly familiar. The thing is, PlanetSide comes out 3 years after Metal Fatigue did. I did look around to try and find an official connection or maybe people who worked on both games, but I couldn't find any. So that's pretty weird.
And even then, that game itself is more of an oddity than anything else like their previous release, Mr. Bones. Oh yeah, Mechanic Warriors never saw completion, the aspirations of its creator far outweighing his skill at the time. Two companies were duly impressed with his efforts nonetheless. Lancor, the software house that contracted Ancel for Warriors, and a startup by the name of Ubisoft. Rolling back the clock a bit, Ancel, while breaking into programming, dabbled in animation and character design, as making video games requires a trifecta of skills. I first drew Rayman when I was just a teenager. At the time, I was simply trying to teach myself to draw, make music, and write code in order to realize my dreams of making video games, Ancel tells Retrogamer, discussing his early days and the birth of Rayman. Meanwhile, the brothers Guillemot were fulfilling their traditional duties of working within the surely dying family business. In GameInformer's Farmers Ubi Uncensored interview, Yves Guillemot explains that we were working with farmers, so the margins were very tight. The business my parents had was actually declining, and so we had to find new businesses, so my older brother Cloud started with CD audio. That was a new revolution. Then they started to sell computers to farmers. After that, they created a shop that sold all sorts of things for farmers on top of normal chemicals and parts. In this shop, we started to sell video games because they were part of the things that could be supplied. We had 20 machines in stock and probably 100 copies of software. There was money to be had, and with a blessing from their mother along the lines of do your business, but there's one condition, do it together and with equal shares, the brothers formally established Ubisoft, the company's debut title, Trivia Pursuit, on the Thomson T08. As opposed to many other developers I've brought up, such as the likes of Remedy or Quantic, who started off in small homes or improvised offices, what separated Ubisoft amongst its peers was that the Guillemots worked out of a chateau. Nothing screams work for us than that promise, and so, with his animation talent, Ancel sent in a reel. From the man's mouth in the uncensored interview, I was around 14 or 15 when I started to program. It was 1987 or 88, and a lot of people were talking about the ozone layer problem in the stratosphere, so I did a funny animation where the molecules of the ozone and the oxygen, and you had the bad CFC bullying and breaking the oxygen. It was like a short animated movie. I sent this project to Ubisoft because they were doing a contest in a magazine that would let you win a computer. I won nothing, but I got a phone call from Ubisoft. I was surprised because the magazine was not directly connected to Ubisoft. They asked me to come to Paris. Traversing the bad streets of Paris, Ancel found an office supposedly belonging to the company, only to be redirected to the countryside castle. At this point, Prime Ubisoft was born. With hungry young developers stationed within Ubisoft, it was only a matter of time until they set their sights on growing. Ancel receiving a Game Boy for his hard work on Brain Blaster being the catalyst. Who to beat in the console world was Nintendo and Sega, the console wars in its pinnacle stages. Moving up from the Game Boy to a Super Nintendo kit, Ubisoft and Ancel had a goal in mind: become as big as the two. To reach such an illustrious standard meant crafting a recognizable identity that could stand out in a sea of imitators that were gunning for the same position. In the pursuit of this goal, Ubisoft had to scale back from his chateau to a down-to-earth office, and Ancel left the developer for a time, not liking how distant he was to his family and realizing that Ubisoft had more than enough members on the team. During this downtime though, Michel honed his artistry, returning to Ubi with a proposal. As Serge Hascott puts it, I don't have a good memory, but this I remember well. We had a meeting with Gerard Guillemot, Yves Guillemot, Michel Guillemot, and myself, plus Michel Ancel and Frédéric Hode, the two who created the Rayman concept. It was a picture of a big giant trombone, and you had to imagine the player inside. It was a totally strange design, and I felt that it could be a cool place to play with the wind and all that kind of stuff. Michel had already worked on the animation system alone in his corner for 6 or so months, and the fluidity of the animation was great. Nothing else was close to that in the industry at the time. We liked it, but it was not a game yet. It was R&D, but I liked it. I said to Yves, Gerard, and Michel that we had to do this game. What was originally planned for the Super Nintendo CD attachment saw its way to the Atari Jaguar before finding a home on Sony's PlayStation. 1995's Rayman. That's a statement and a half describing the battlefield at the time. The later half of the Bit Wars allowed any inspiring developer to showcase their talent as long as they could visually impress their audience. Why else was the Jaguar picked for Rayman? From the Retrogamer interview, after a great deal of thought, Ancel eventually decided that the Atari Jaguar would become the final home for his new creation, although this later changed to the PlayStation. In hindsight, it seems like utter madness to launch a new IP on such an unproven system, but there was reasoning behind Ancel's decision. Atari's machine had amazing raw power that the other systems he had been tinkering with just didn't possess. When the Atari Jaguar was released, I felt it was the first console that was capable of displaying our graphics, he says. Of course, more people played the PlayStation version, the forerunner for perfection, easily beating out the Toilet and Saturn, leading Ubisoft to favor Sony. And despite Rayman's 2D style, it matched blow for blow against the likes of Resi 2 and Tomb Raider, taking slot 16 out of 20 for the best-selling games on the PlayStation. With the success of Rayman, Ubisoft and Ancel got their dream, the French company entangling itself with North America. From here, Ancel would take on the director role again for 1999's Rayman 2: The Great Escape, originally conceived as another 2D game before transitioning to full 3D. While my interactions with Rayman have been mostly kept to a minimum, you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone who doesn't know the acclaim that game has. However, for 2003's Rayman 3: Hoodlum Havoc, Ancel would be demoted to an advisory role, probably because he had the arduous undertaking breathing beyond good and evil to life. As such, he wasn't heavily involved with Havoc, Ancel explaining to GameSpy when asked if he felt satisfied with 3. That's a political question. I think that I would have made it different. When it was released, I appreciated the fact that it was fresh with new characters and things. It's funny because it's not my Rayman, you see. I worked on Rayman 1 and Rayman 2, so it's like another game to me, another character, so I will say I would have made it different. He goes on to state that the team did do their best given the expectations placed on them, and if you're wondering when asked why he left Rayman 4 Beyond, Ancel provides us with 2 reasons. The main reason I think is very personal and quite selfish. Just because I had spent more than 5 years with Rayman, maybe more, 6 years, so from 20 to 26 you become different. You like different things, you acquire different tastes, you are different, and sometimes it's good to change and work with different characters. I don't understand how it's possible to use the same old character for 20 years. I think that people are always changing, and I was not comfortable in doing another Rayman. I had so many ideas for another world and other types of stories. So, Rayman 3: Hoodlum Havoc saw multiple releases in 2003, mostly in March for the consoles at the time, GameCube, Xbox, and PlayStation 2, but there was also an Engage version as well as re-releases coming in March of 2012. The version I will be looking at will be the GameCube solely for nostalgic reasons, though I do own the GOG copy that doesn't have controller support, or if it does, it isn't simple to set up. Tired of having to manhunt my recording sessions, if you feel me. Our tale opens up with peace, tranquility, only for it to get sundered by black lums. All the red lums have mysteriously turned black and transformed into hoodlums, weird violent sack creatures bent on world domination. Or its destruction, and we don't really know, as resident hero Rayman beats down the black lum leader Andre before he gets to the world source, but the lum accidentally flies into Glowbox.
Excuse me, have you seen Andre? Get me out of here or I'll start chewing! Oh, you idiots! Just what I thought. Andre isn't dead. We can't keep Glowbox near the heart. It's too risky. Rayman, Glowbox is your friend. Take him to the witch doctors in Clearleaf Forest. He and I go way back. He'll know how to get rid of Andre. Look out, Rayman. Andre is a black lum, and black lums are twisted. He may even force Glowbox to drink plum juice, and we all know Glowbox is allergic to plum juice. See you in Rayman 4!
Not wanting his friend to die? Rayman, Glowbox, and inadvertently Andre travel across the realms to unvor the Black Lum, making enemies with the Kanaran Reflux, who ends up joining Andre after he's free.
Glowbox-san, very tense, rockery. I know how to drive out a negative energy. Kitty, 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 kitty.
No, I'm not coming out! I learned the habit of obeying orders!
Oh, yeah? Let's see about that. Otto!
I'm thinking your other stuff.
Romeo! Could you please hurry up?
Group therapy? Groovy. I totally dig those. Wow.
Ready?
like the llama so fast.
If he finds the energy to multiply, all is lost.
Exactly.
Come on! Wake up! Come on! This way! Ah! Nothing is lost, my brothers! Hear me! I know someone who can help us! Follow me! Reflux! I know that you dream of getting revenge against Rayman, and I need energy to multiply. Steal the scepter from your king, and I will serve you Rayman's head on a platter.
However, Rayman beats both down again so that he and Glowbox can catch up on their napping, revealing that it was Rayman's hands that possibly started the whole adventure in the first place. It's a case of, what do you want me to say? Hoodlum Havoc's plot is basic, but that's all it really needs to be. Andre is trying to take over the world and or destroy it, and go stop him. What I will say is that the comedic timings of the game are enjoyable, though do expect weirdness to be a common happenstance. There's a reason why the hint in the last video was vor, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. Glowbox acts as if he's pregnant with Andre. There's the relationship between Razov and Bioganax that dips right into kinky territory.
Aha! There you are. Get ready for this. Oh. Oh.
Oh, my stallion! Finally, I can hold you in my arms.
Stay away.
Oh, gimme. Oh, yes, I didn't know. Girl, punish me. I think I need to be grounded. Throw me in your cell and chain me to the bars.
Hey, Rayman. How are we gonna get to the doctors?
I think I have an idea. And the voice of the horrible machine going for its best ASMR impression.
Andy's here someplace, I just know it. That little guy was starting to grow on me.
Good day. You are entering the headquarters of the Black Lumza. Exterior temperature, minus 61 degrees. Interior temperature, 98.6 degrees and rising.
Wow, Ellie's got a lovely voice. I'd sure like to meet her.
Now you know why the Rayman video game ads were always horny. The games don't tend to shy away from it. I do like that for a good portion of the story, Andre stuck in Glowbox neutering his menace that only recovers when he seeks the help of Reflux. But that's what I find funny about the villains in this story. They're Class A losers. It's hard to take either seriously, especially since Rayman beats both only for them to come crawling back for another ass whooping. That says to me how much you're not supposed to take this story with any gravitas. You know, while this game is clearly aged, I think a lot of the art direction still holds up. Rayman as a series, while I haven't played any of the other games, I do know the gist of how each looks, has generally hit a blend of cutesy naturism against a backdrop of the dark and macabre. While Hoodlum Havoc aims for much of what Great Escape did, the overarching visual design lies with nature versus machinery / civilization. It is a solid basis to build the presentation on. Many of the worlds that Rayman visits, while not all bright and cheery, have a unique feel to them that hits a specific biome. From the lush forests of Clearleaf to the murky depths of the bog to the scorching sands of the Kanaran deserts, almost all the levels are steeped in the natural world. However, there are always tiny bits of civilization earmarking each, from the Fairy Council in the opening stage to the Kanaran Society dwelling underground. What speaks volumes is how all the original inhabitants seem to live in one with their world, seeing as I've brought them up and they're the only race we see up close. Unlike the fairies or teensies, the Kanarans, while having terraformed the desert, have done so in a non-destructive manner. Their whole entire cave system incorporates stone, bone, and many other elements of the earth used in their base states. To further establish their connection to the world, they worship a bird-like god by the name of Liptus that holds the title the Bringer of Night, possibly a Nyx-like entity. While they do have a dislike of trespassers and hunt down the teensies, they aren't an abnormality in the ecosystem and can accept outsiders that prove themselves.
Get him. Tear off his flesh. Stick bamboo under his nails.
Don't hold back!
Tear off his flesh.
Rayman, you fought heroically in the arena, even though it kills me to have to say it. Reflux has never known the taste of defeat. Shut up, you idiot. I'm the king.
Yes, Majesty.
As a reward, you shall receive the power of Leptus. Oh, Leptus! Oh, father of the Canaran people! Give to this mighty, mighty warrior the greatest of power!
This puts them in direct contrast to the Hoodlums. There's a reason why they wield traditional firearms. What's more civilized than that? And wherever the Hoodlums go, they make shanty towns, desecrating the world to their own end. That's no better seen than the mechanical monstrosity that is their headquarters. You know, it says a lot that the icy tundras of the summit beyond the clouds are warmer than the crude industrial hallways centered solely on the production of plum juice and weaponry. The Hoodlums HQ is as heartless as they are, a machine erected only to spread pain and misery, just like the Hoodlums. If I wanted to go even further, the machine is a perversion of Rayman's world, a setting that was once natural corrupted into a soulless shell, like how the Hoodlums were once Redlums. This extends to the character designs as well, many of the creatures of Rayman's world clashing directly with the Hoodlums or more enlightened figures. While Rayman will always be a funny anomaly with his hoodie and limblessness, look at somebody like Globox or the Canarans versus the Hoodlums or Razov. Globox is as breezy as a spring day, while the Canarans dress themselves in caveman-like dressings compared to the Hoodlums and Razov's modern day attire of long-brimmed hats. The Hoodlums' bodies are made from Bonton fur as well, driving home the comparison I'm making. Even though the teensies do break this mold, they stick more to fantasy ideas outside of the Doctors for their costumes, standing them out from the Hoodlums. Animation-wise, characters are fluid and full of energy. It's as if Rayman 3 wanted to bring the expressiveness from 1 into a 3D space. From Rayman's jovial victory celebrations to Globox's drunken states, the game looks like a cartoon. To keep in line with that, the sound effects are of the same level. There's not too much to mention on this front. The game when playing sounds fine, but one little detail I do like is that when piggy banks are broken, they make a pig snorting noise. I think why I don't have much to say about the sound effects is because the OST by Eric Chevalier is a certified banger. From tiny jingles to themes, a lot of the music within Hoodlum Havoc is memorable. From the swanky bop that is the teensy highway to the fast-paced jams of the Hood Boom to essentially all the boss themes, Eric outdid himself for this one. Especially since many of the tracks are dynamic. The Plum Carrying theme has the main track a losing the plum jingle and puzzle completion jingle. Likewise, Begoniacs has her main battle theme, then two other versions, one for when she turns Rayman into a frog, the other when she's turned into one. Rounding out the game is the voice acting, each VA working well with the material. From David Gassman's Rayman, John Leguizamo's Globox, and Ken Starcevic's Andre providing consistent banter to all the Doctors and their wacky hijinks, the cast puts on a good show. Repeating what I said at the top, while the game is aged, the presentation is a fine workhorse.
You've seen too many gladiator flicks. I don't deserve this abuse. Take it easy, Rayman. Andy's on board. You were nicer in Rayman 2.
Come in here and try that.
Rayman 3 Hoodlum Havoc is a 3D action platformer that splits focuses between a traditional gameplay style centered around jumping and shooting. Punching? There's elements of third-person punching with this one, and whatever the devs fancied for a level. I'll come back to this when covering the levels proper. We are once again without a difficulty select, though on average I would call Rayman 3 an easy game with spikes in certain but spread out sections. One thing you need to know about Rayman when piloting him is that because he's an abomination to society who may or may not have a big cock, well, the ad for the game proposes that, which, yeah, 2000s gaming adverts were high-key bizarre up to the point that John Romero calling me a bitch seems quaint. is that in his arsenal he has access to a glide by spinning his hair ears, or hears for short, and his main method of attack is sending out his fists as projectiles. If you couldn't guess from that, Rayman needs his hands to grab onto ledges, so if he doesn't have both free I.E, he's attacking while trying to grab one, he won't be able to. In that same breath, if Rayman is charging his fist attack for more damage, it will be cancelled out when he goes for a ledge. Granted, the amount of times where combat and platforming meet is rare, though in those moments, just avoiding the threat is the best option. Speaking of charging attacks, if Rayman is hit while he's doing so, it will also stop the charge, forcing him to build it up again. To help in combat, Rayman can lock onto targets, allowing him to strafe or curve his shots around defenses. He also has a roll, but just moving around is enough to avoid attacks. Besides taking damage from being hit, Rayman will also lose 1 point from his score. Score is the only mechanic tying all the levels together. Most of the actions Rayman is capable of doing, such as killing enemies, collecting treasures, or finding secrets, those being the tree frogs, red bug things, and the teensies, will add to his score and start a combo. Doing more of the above will add to your combo score and extend it, with the combo ending roughly after 2 seconds, so you have to be quick, otherwise you won't get a lot of points. Regarding the teensies, though they are considered secrets, some are mandatory as they spawn items for you to use, while others gift you treasure. You want to find them though, and it is hard to miss them as when you are near their cages they shout out help. A progress meter flashes on screen detailing how many you've freed out of 6. 6 free teensies means more health for you. Trust me, you want the extra health as Rayman starts with a piddly amount, but red lums are a constant pickup, healing Rayman for a portion of his health, and he even gets an ability to turn defeated hoodlums into red lums. Boss arena red lums also respawn, giving you infinite health in theory. Still, do avoid dying as this game has no checkpoints. Going back to the items given to you by the required teensies, it's detergent. No, seriously, Murphy explains that the cans of laser beams are military grade detergent that gives Rayman an ability for a set period of time while timesing his score by 2. Level progression, when not locked behind a simple puzzle or set piece such as facing off against your shoe, is A to B affairs blocked by certain detergent sensitive obstacles. Detergent itself also makes Rayman more dangerous in combat, but only with green cyclone shrink punches, red powered fists, and blue shock claw whips. Enemies can also hold on to detergent, and some require the usage of particular kinds to be defeated. At the end of every level, the player is ranked out of 5 stars depending on their score for the segment. A higher score means a better completion percentage, which unlocks the bonus levels. Notice how I've brought up the ending of a level first. Worlds in Rayman are divided into level segments, but each world is subject to its own theme. What you do in Clearleaf Forest will be different from the bog, land of the living dead, desert, what have you. Each world has a gimmick or idea it wants to stick to, with a set piece to solidify the idea. So for the Kanaran Desert, it's a mostly stealth-oriented world, while the summit beyond the peaks has a brief snowboarding interlude. These moments break up the usual gameplay. Doing that as well are the bosses, which follow the same philosophy as the worlds. One might see you bounce green goo to transform a hag into a toad while never dodging underwater projectiles back into a large mech. Expect the unexpected with Hoodlum Havoc. Probably the best aspect of the game is how confident it is with switching it up almost every level. While the game does have a defined style, being a 3D platformer with shades of third-person punching mechanics, the amount of times it differs from the norm is surprising. You can see this from the first minute of the game, as instead of starting off with traditional gameplay, you're in a flying section with Murphy teaching you that red lums are health pickups. Even after that, Rayman doesn't have his hands, introducing how important they are to him, as he can't attack long-distance targets nor grab onto ledges without them. However, that is not the only thing the tutorial world, the Fairy Council, teaches you, as without his hands, Rayman can still attack with kicks, an option that is highly useful against one-on-one threats due to its ability to stunlock average hoodlums. Then to wrap up the stage, Rayman gets his hands, which is where you are properly introduced to the combo system and how detergent plays into that and level traversal. Rayman 3 is a score attacker's paradise, as planning out optimal routes through each area while taking advantage of detergent and treasure placement is how you get good good rankings. Since almost every action the player can do awards some form of points, stringing them all together is the real challenge of the game. There's a reason why getting hit subtracts a point, though I honestly do wish getting hit took off more points to solidify this element of Hoodlum Havoc. Finishing up the council sees you play through what I consider some of my favorite sections of Rayman 3, the Disco Superhighway. Any other game would have had you teleport to the next area or show you a cutscene of the character arriving at a new location, but Rayman 3 decides to throw out all conventions as it provides you a bit of a platforming challenge each time you complete a world. What is not to love about these in-between levels? From the psychedelic atmosphere to the swanky music, the highway stages are such a wonderful experience. Following the council is Clearleaf and its ingraining of how detergent works, as well as establishing the game-wide mechanic of plum juice. Clearleaf acts as an extended playground for you to test out what you learned at the council, while providing its own challenges in the form of new detergent, enemies, and gameplay styles. Two moments from this stage stand out to me, the waterfall and Hood Stomper. The waterfall, like the opening Murphy sequence, uses a system wholly unique to it that only happens at this part of Hoodlum Havoc. You only climb one waterfall, and if this was any other game I would ask why include a random detour, but because this game opened up with non-traditional gameplay, I feel that it leaves the player on their toes. What new gameplay style might I see next? That's when Hood Stomper comes in. For a first boss, Hood Stomper is a relatively normal fight, but it's after you beat him does the game throw you for another loop. Kill the remaining hoodlums with the contraption. Once again, Hoodlum Havoc displays how irregular it wants to be as a platformer, and on the subject of bosses, the game isn't afraid to experiment with them either. Half of them, Razov, Reflex 1, and the Horrible Machine, are normal bosses. The rest are a hodgepodge of differing ideas. Begoniacs is a war of cat and mouse centered around a cauldron. Cleoche, the only underwater boss, sees you never directly damage him, and Reflux the Leptis serves as an exam on using detergent while also dragging in the hovercraft for a turret segment and bombing run. In the last few seconds of gameplay, Hoodlum Havoc still keeps to its guns even when it could be considered alienating. Like, the hovercraft's gun only gets introduced in the level previous to the final boss, and Hoodlum Havoc goes, yeah, let's base the last phase of the final boss on that. Moving back to the regular bosses, what elevates two of the three of them, as the Horrible Machine might be the weakest boss in the game as all you do is hit a target, but the level preceding it has the ASMR PA, so I'll cut it some slack, is how detergent plays a role. Razov Phase 2 and Reflex can be punched down with Rayman's underpowered fists, but the game really wants you to use the detergent. While damage is the main reason for Razov, using the power fist sends him flying from his wrecking ball, stunning him and giving you better opportunities to dodge and retaliate. Razov's wrecking ball has to return to where he got knocked down, making him more predictable. For Reflex, it is solely damage, as he is the hardiest out of all of the bosses, Rayman's underperforming hands not catching the Kanaran as much. This goes without saying, his fights are my favorite out of the 7 due to their challenge and incorporation of detergent. I guess I'll round out the good by saying that despite my brief covering of the story, there are great moments in it. The various doctor visits Rayman and Globox go to try and remove Andre are a highlight, since each doctor is a stereotype with varying views on medicine, and the small character interactions are a treat. Rayman, Globox, and Andre all small talk with each other, and a funny little detail is that whenever Globox is in your party, you can punch him for a quip or two. That's one of the ways you find out that Globox views Andre as his child. The game's experimentation can sometimes shoot itself in the foot. Not every level gimmick is a winner, and some are clearly duds. For starters, the Kanaran Desert is when the first few cracks start to show up in the game. A majority of the world's level structure is based around switch and sound puzzles as well as stealth. Starting with the latter first, as it carries the greater load, it isn't interesting on a few fronts. The Kanarans, despite babbling humorous threats that are admittedly chuckle-worthy, aren't all that dangerous. They move slow enough that you can easily run away when spotted. They have the attention span of a gnat, and though a teensy does claim that they are bad news when they catch you, they don't do any more damage than the hoodlums you've faced before. At their worst, the patrols are a minor nuisance that has to be figured around instead of confronted. This leads into how most Kanarans are avoided, ringing gongs. Anytime a Kanaran is blocking the way, 10 times out of 10, this will be your way past them. The desert has real troubles with diversifying its structure. The switch puzzle's the nail in the coffin. I don't get the obsession this level has with pressure plate puzzles, but there is nothing enjoyable about having to move an object slowly only to put it down to fend off some ghosts. Combat-wise, the the desert introduces the lava craft hoodlums and ramps up the fighting, where you start to realize how shallow it is. Rayman's only defense is throwing hands, and while enemy reactions are spectacular, almost all encounters go the same way, and with hoodlums having a brief window of invulnerability after being hit, some fights drag on for far too long. Not to jump around, but the Tower of Leptis is a gauntlet for your sanity at times. 4 hecklers? Really? What's with the third entry of mascot platformer games making fighting enemies a core mechanic? Going back chronologically, the worst section of the game is the longest shortcut. Pacing-wise, the level is a slog, doubly so since it's placed right after the desert but before the summit. Instead of getting you back into the groove, shortcut sees you deal with a worldwide puzzle by collecting crowns to open doors. What you are subjected to is in theory laughably easy platforming that becomes frustrating due to the camera. Hoodlum's camera system isn't the worst I've dealt with, but it tends to stick to walls and is X-inverted with no way to change it. Shortcut seems more like a tutorial level than anything else, as there are no enemies and Rayman deals with multiple detergent required issues when grabbing the crowns. The only gimmick to the level are the invisible platforms, but only a few sections have Rayman deal with them. I question the inclusion of Shortcut, as it seems to me that the game wanted a platforming focused world, completely forgetting that the other stages already had that covered. Both Clearleaf and Bog before it and Summit and HQ after have jumping sections, so Shortcut doesn't stand out, which to me is the worst statement I could apply to a level. On a gameplay front, the lack of level checkpoints is contentious for me. Hoodlum Havoc isn't a hard game, thus I didn't die a lot, but the times I did saw me repeat 2 of the lengthiest parts, the hovercraft and rematch against Reflux. I don't have qualms of either or, just don't die during them as checkpoints are non-existent. You have to begin from the start of a segment. Of course, I've already mentioned the Sonic Heroes tier combat problems, but yeah, most fights devolve into slap battles. Rayman does have low health starting out, but teensies are so common and easy to find that once you get enough sextuplets, you can just eat damage with no recourse as you fling fists at the somewhat boring cast of hoodlums. Only a few require any strategy or usage of detergent, which is kind of a shame, especially since the bosses take advantage of this aspect. Rayman 3 is a fine platformer. The positives of the game, its experimental nature and unabashed attitude, do wrestle a bit with the weaker parts, a lack of consistency in levels and bare bones combat, but I will say the better half does win out in the end. While it is available on the PlayStation 3 and GOG, I would say pick it up on the Xbox as it is backwards compatible on the Bone and Sex. Figured I'd cover something lighter and quicker after No More Heroes as a bit of a palate cleanser from the more serious tone NMH had. I hadn't done a game from my childhood in a while, the last video covering such a subject being Custom Robo. Damn, that feels like ages ago when in fact it was only 3 or 4 months before this video. What's ultimately funny about Rayman 3 to me is that it never drove me to play the other Rayman games. This is a question to life I will never find the answer to. Better yet, why did childhood me pick this one out? Neither before nor since have I played another game in this series, so I had no attachment to the man without limbs, so who knows? It's one of the mysteries of life. Like me finding out about Monster Girl Quest through a LP done by a native French speaker. There is something I can applaud the French for. This showing of Rayman 3 Hoodlum Havoc is over, but stay tuned for our next feature involving a mostly silent protagonist, blood, and horrors beyond the realm of time.